Hi everyone, this is Tanya from the Creativerie. Welcome to video number 3, where we're going to talk about stitches that are used in embroidery. The most common stitches that I use actually for my patterns. We're going to do a backstitch. We're going to do a satin stitch. We'll do French knots, and we're going to do a couching method. So we're going to show these to you on this hoop here, and then we're going to move over to the pattern that we talked about in video number 3, and that is the Monstera. I wish I hadn't have put the stitch directions on one of the sides, but that's okay. We're just going to have to roll with it. One side we're going to do a satin stitch, and the other side we're going to do the running stitch, so that you can kind of see which way both of them can be done. Again, these are the examples that I have of the Monstera. This is the back stitch here, which is just merely an outline of the Monstera, and then we have the one with the satin stitch that fills in. So basically we're like painting with thread, and then we'll do a couching method in here for the stem. So let's get to it. All right, so I already have all of my thread ready, and I made an extra one as well to get started. So if you want to hit pause on this video now to maybe make up a couple of threads so that they're ready and you can keep going and keeping the momentum going, that's fine. Like I said, I already did mine. So when we cut thread in the last video, I cut a very short piece of thread. It actually is double the size of this, because remember, we split it in half, and then we put it on the needle and then tied a knot at the end. So this is just a short piece that I have, which is fine because we'll get a chance to see the knots again on how they're done. So remember, we take a piece of thread off of the skein. The color I'm using right here is 987, and it probably is maybe a 36 or 40 inch piece that I did, and then I cut them. I split them all in half, so I have 2 pieces here, and then I have 2 more pieces over here, and then what's left over, that last one that we had. So let's get started. So I've already put a new piece of fabric into a hoop for the sake of showing this example. And so what we do is we're going to come in from behind. Now, obviously, it just takes a little getting used to. You're going to run your needle in the back until you find where the line starts. Now, remember, I've always said, do not draw out anything you can't cover with thread, okay? So I'm going to make sure that I cover that whole line. So we're going to start with the back stitch. So I'll come in from the bottom. I'm going to go down. This is probably about 1/8 of an inch, or maybe just a little bit more. Whatever size that you do, make sure that you continuously keep with that stitch length. Then I'm going to come down through the back, and I'm going to come up just a little bit past it, okay? Because then I'm going to go back down into the hole of the first one. I apologize if you can hear a car alarm in the background. Nothing I can do about that. Again, I'm going to come up about 1/8 of an inch down from where I came on the last one. And you can see why this is called the back stitch. We are kind of working backwards here. And this is a great outline stitch that you can use to either outline pieces at the end. Remember, in one of my videos I did talk about cotton pearl cotton DMC in how we outline pieces, and here towards the end of the video I'll find a piece to show you what I mean by outlining your piece, and it gives it an extra added dimension. So I'm just going to continue to follow along this line, coming up with the same amount of space between each stitch. Now, a running stitch is a lot like this one, only you leave a space in between. And you can even see where I left that one just a little bit short. You can see what happens when you can start to notice the change in size if you're not careful. And for some people, it doesn't really matter. To me, I don't let it bother me. Now, you see, like, I'm not going to come up right there at the end of the line. I'm going to go just a tad past it because it's a little short, because one of my stitches was short. So I'm just going to come up and go down. So in the back, this is a little more thread than I need in the back here, but because I don't want to cross over and come up behind here, you can see the ghost threads that can show. So I like to make sure that when I am sewing, there's nothing wrong with stopping where you are and making a knot. So I'm going to cut off my needle. My needle's on a magnet over here. Split this apart. And remember the sneaker knot. It's like tying your shoes, only instead of tying a bow, you're going to tie a knot. And that will ensure that your thread doesn't come out. Cut it down to, not down to the bitter end, but just enough that it might lay down, okay? A little shorter would have been okay, but that's okay. I'm not here to cut it so short that you can't see it. So, all right, so there's our first stitch. This is the back stitch. Now, moving forward, I've already got another one threaded, and this one is much longer. This one definitely was probably about 36 inches. And the reason why I just picked 36 inches is because it merely is like a yardstick. On my desk, I actually have a piece of tape to the end and that measure, so I don't have to like actually get a yardstick out. Not that I do anyways. But when I'm putting kits together and I'm measuring thread, I have to do that. Okay, next up, let's talk about the satin stitch. So the satin stitch is merely filling everything in, and we're going to follow along with that line. Now, to get like that, we probably we'll start on one end to the other. We're not doing a pot, and that this would mimic a pot. And we're just going to go from one end to the other. And in the back, if you can see, that we're not going to come back up. I'll show you what I mean by this, but we're just going to keep going back and forth like we're doing a loop. We're not going to come up here, go across, and then come back up over here to go across over there. We want to come up here, go down here, and then in the back, we're going to come back up right underneath that and go across. So let's get started. Now, in embroidery, when you have transferred your pattern to your material, it is okay to come up right on that line or just a smidge after it. I came right up on that line, which is fine. And I'm going to go straight down where I was. Now, as I hold this across, I know that that is a great place to go down because it's going to cover up that line. Oftentimes, if you put your pattern on here and then you put it in your hoop and you're stretching and pulling, it sometimes gets a little off, and that's not a problem. Let's just say, for instance, that the line was down, that the line from here, this line right here, kind of came down over here. No problem. I would just make an adjustment and come right up over the top of it to make sure it was straight. And so I'm going to go straight down. And also, one thing to keep in mind is in the back as you're sewing, sometimes your thread gets turned around. You can just hold it. It's kind of hard to show you from my desk, but you can just hold it and hold it like an old school telephone wire. Remember when we were younger in the 80s, we used to wrap up the cord, and so you'd have to unplug it and kind of let it unwrap itself. All you got to do is just hold your piece up and let it fall below, and then it'll unwrap itself. If your threads start to get twisted up, it will show on the front of the piece. Okay, I came back up right underneath the other one, and I'm going to go right down again on the other side. This is what the back looks like. We're going to fill it in the back just like we are in the front. And if you make a mistake and you think, gee, that's probably a little too far out, no big deal. Just pull your needle back out and go again. See how it's laying nice and flat? If by accident you're sewing and you're not really paying attention, let's just say, for instance, you go down a little too far and oops, now it's crooked, you can do one of two things. You can either come back up right next to it and fill it in, or I like to just pull it out. So if you pull the string back, flip your piece over, you can usually guide that needle right back through where you came up at. And that's just some of the ways you can fix some of the mistakes you might make. Worst case scenario, you make a big mistake, not a big deal. You might have to cut those threads out, pull them out, and start over. As long as your material is intact and it is not stretched or ruined, you can start again. I've had to do that to pieces where I just didn't like how something turned out, and therefore I cut it out and I started over. Because, you know, you do a big piece, you don't want a mistake to haunt you. You want it to look nice. See how nice that is laying there? This is the satin stitch again. This is so common, this particular stitch. Probably I use this stitch 90% of the time. Especially when I'm teaching my classes, I do a lot of pots with succulents in them. And notice how carefully I'm keeping my edges and it's staying relatively very round. Okay, circles are very hard to keep perfect. So you just got to slow down a little bit, take your time, follow your lines, go down right where you're supposed to. And there goes that car alarm again. Sorry about that. Could be worse. We could be listening to my dogs bark. But they're taking a nap right now. So, all right, I'm coming up kind of probably on the last one here. I might have one more after that. Let's see where we are. Actually, that looks pretty darn good. I don't want to go any further than that because then it starts to come down to a pointy edge. All right, so that looks really good. Now, there's a lot of thread left here, and yes, I can do something with this thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cut this kind of shorter, and within a couple inches, I can actually tie a knot. It kind of depends on you. I have chunky fingers, so sometimes any shorter than that, I would not be able to tie a knot. There we go. Perfect. And then I will cut off the extras. And there you have the satin stitch. All right. Next up is going to be couching. So I'm just going to put another knot at the end of this piece that I was using. This couching is actually very easy. Now, couching is typically used in a pattern if you have like a stem in the middle and you want to do one long string, but you want to be able to make sure it's laying down flat like I did here. You can see that I came up here and I obviously went down here at the end of the stem, or the stalk, if you will. So what I did is I just laid it down and then I held on to it and I would come up from behind and I left these little stitches that go over the top of that and it tacks it down. You don't have to do that. Couching also can be used when you are going around something when you're doing an outline. You take maybe like a 1/4 of an inch, lay it down, but what would end up happening is when you come up here and you go down here, it's going to go straight across, right? Well, then you come up here, you come up here, you're going to grab onto that thread and you're going to bring it and it will end up hooking up over here. It's kind of the best way I know how to explain it. So let's just do it and I will show you what I mean. So I'm going to come up right here on this line and I'm going to go down right here. So that's just one big long stitch in a nutshell. But let's just say that that was part of a leaf vein stem in the middle, right? And I want to make sure that it doesn't move from side to side. So I'm going to actually use my thumb to just push over a little bit. I'm going to come up right underneath it. And I'm going to go back down in the same hole that I came up. And see how that just covers it right up, and then you come up again. You can use your thumb to kind of rock it off to the side and go back down into the same hole. You know, it's merely a method of tacking down one long piece of thread. Let's try Let's try something that might be not a square. So let's just say, for instance, that this was a leaf. Well, actually, I could even just use this half moon that we have here. Is I'm going to come up here, and I want to go around, but I don't want to do this stitch all the way around. I'm going to go, if I look at the distance between here and here, it probably would need minimally 2 stitches, one here and one here. So let's just go down right here towards the end. See what I mean by it doesn't lay around the pot, it tries to go across. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come up right behind it, and I'm actually going to come up right behind, and then I'm going to grab onto the material, the thread, and I'm going to go right back down. See how that outlined, and it also kind of looks just like this stitch going around. I'm sorry if I thought that maybe it would take 2 stitches, but maybe not. So then I would come back up halfway here, go back down in the hole. Now you can leave it like this, knowing you're going to put a stitch in there. Come up right where you want to, pull it slowly, and then go back down where you came up. Just a way to kind of go around something. It kind of looks wonky because this is teeny tiny, but in a bigger piece, when you want to outline something, it doesn't look, you don't really notice it that much. And typically, I also use black. I never outline the same color that I'm sewing with. But again, we have a short string, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut that. And I'm going to tie a knot. Now, if you know of different ways to tie knots in the back, you can. There is a way where you can roll your needle and then drag it down and pull it. I tend to find that that is hard for beginners to do when they don't know that that knot has to be literally right next to it. This is how I kind of invented that sneaker knot. Okay, so couching, satin stitch, and the back stitch. Now we're going to do French knots. Now, when people hear French knots, they start to get very nervous. I know I was very nervous when I started doing French knots, and I started watching some videos online, and it honestly wasn't that bad. So we're going to thread our needle, pull this to the middle, tie a knot on the end. Let's get started. So French knots, they're done in multiple ways. You come up from the bottom. I always like to make sure everything's out of the way when I'm doing French knots, because I have to lay the piece down. And you're going to hold on to the thread and you're going to wrap it around your needle. Well, how did I do that? 1, 2, 3 times. Hold on to it straight, tight. You can go back down either right next to where you had that, where you came up from, or you can go back down the same hole because the knot's going to stop it from coming back in. So I'm going to pull it down. I'm keeping this tight. I'm going to pull it in from the back. Slowly, I'm going to let go and keep pulling. Try not to let any other knots get on top of your first knot. And there we have our first French knot. There's some embroidery pieces out there that are gorgeous, and they're literally all French knots, and some, you know, seed stitch, like a tree, and then the tree leaves are all French knots. I did a piece with French knots once. There's our second one. And I honestly, because I did so many, I actually had a thing that holds my embroidery piece, and so I don't have to hold on to the hoop. It's just one of those extra things. It's kind of like an easel for a canvas for an artist. that it's got this clamp and it comes down and it actually holds on to this, and it's really tight. It's made out of wood. I don't know what the name of it is. Probably maybe an embroidery stand. They can get expensive. I think it was like $50, and of course I never pay full price for anything. So I probably used a coupon and got it for 25, 30 bucks, and it sits in the corner. Just because I've mostly been working on smaller projects. All right, so there's 3 French knots. Let's do 3 more. Obviously, there's other stitches that people use in their pieces, and I think that as you know, the library of videos and patterns are put out by myself. If there's a new stitch in there, we always would talk about it before getting started, just so that people can feel comfortable. Another thing that I also recommend that I talk about in my class that I teach is to make sure that you have a hoop that is an extra, that you can throw some material in there. Because let's just say you're working on this project and, oh, now you got to go do French knots. Well, what if you screw them up? Do you scrap the whole project? No. So when you want to practice a stitch or see how something might look, you can use that other hoop. And I probably have it here, and I'll show it to you towards the end. You can use it as your practice hoop. There's lots of stitches out there, and I highly recommend Googling different embroidery stitches out there. If you just Google embroidery stitches, I mean, you're just going to get so many. All right, so look at our really nice French knots, couching, satin stitch, and our backstitch. And there you have it. So while this is just a little piece that I put together here, we're actually going to work on our monstera. One half I want to work on doing the satin stitch, and the other one I want to do the outline, just so that you can see. So before I do that, I'd like to throw a little shout out to the ladies over at For Good Vibes in Medford, Massachusetts, as well as Somerville, Massachusetts. These ladies had reached out to me some time ago last year and asked me if I wanted to teach in their store, and I did. So I made this kit for one of the workshops that we did, but they have these for sale in the store. You can check out their website. I will link it in the bottom of this video, and you can actually get a curbside pickup and pick one of these embroidery kits up. They have everything you need to get started, and they also have they have instructions that we've already talked about. They have the thread in them already that corresponds with the color fabric you have. The monstera is actually already drawn on there for you, and your needle is already threaded for the first time, and then my business card is in there. One of the things that I highly recommend is that you do watch my first 2 videos. It will help make sense of the instructions that are in here, because these instructions are meant to be used in person, though they're pretty easy to follow if you didn't see these videos. So these videos kind of accompany that pattern. But you can get this kit over at For Good Vibes in Medford, and I will link the website for them in this video so that you can see what their hours are right now. Obviously, it's March 22nd, 2020, and we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, and people are trying to stay home, and I get that. You know, if you can't get over there this time, you can always find a way to, well, I'm putting out a PDF in the earlier video number 2 maybe, with the pattern and everything, that, you know, if you have this stuff lying around already, you could actually get started. But I highly recommend checking out their store and supporting small. Those ladies are great. So let's keep moving on. So I'm not gonna close this out with a sneaker knot, or maybe I already did. I'm just gonna keep moving. In video number 2, when I talked about transferring the pattern, I meant to not put these hash marks on here, and that's just a stitch direction. So for purposes of this video, we're probably not going to finish this to look like this, but we already have one that's already done, and then we have one that has the back stitch that's already done. So I just want to give you an example. Maybe we'll just do half halfway here. So I like to start at the top. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to take that back. Yeah, we're going to start at the top. This side on the right, we're just going to do the back stitch. Now if you can see what I did is I accidentally grabbed that knot, and I knew that I did, so I wanted to separate that. Otherwise, sometimes it causes a big mess. So we're just going to follow along, doing our back stitch, following along with the pattern. Now, when you're going around corners, it's totally okay to take a little smaller of a stitch versus the 1/8 of an inch that I highly recommend, because if you do an 1/8 of an inch, it's going to come up square. Yes, projects do look neater when everything is nice and perfect, but you know what? We don't live in a perfect world, and I embrace imperfection. So at any time, you can always stop this video and catch up. I sew pretty quickly, but I've also had many years of experience. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment, a question in the comments down below, and I'll do my very best to answer your questions. You can find me also on social media on Instagram. I link my website as a link tree just because I can put everything on there from my classes to all my social media, Facebook, etc. I do have an Etsy shop, which as soon as I get a couple more patterns ready to go, like I'm thinking about like once a month writing a pattern and then doing a video that goes with it, like a live sew along. I think that it's kind of fun to do it with other people, and right now, while we're not allowed to really be around a lot of people, sometimes the internet's the way to go. You know, for many years I've been thinking about doing these videos, and really honestly it took the social distancing for me to say, you know what, it's now or never. Time to do it. So here I am. All right, so you can see how I am just outlining this side of the Monstera leaf. Make sure that your hoop stays tight. Remember, snare drum. Keeping it as tight as you can, just because it's easier to sew, and your stitches will lay more flat. The possibilities are really endless with embroidery nowadays. I learned on tea towels doing a chain stitch, I think, with my grandma when I was really young. And then I picked it back up. Okay. I put a PDF with directions and points that we've talked about in the description of the video. You can download those. If you have trouble with those, please let me know via an email. That way I have your email to send it to you. So very quickly, this method can be completed very quickly. I'm actually just working my way through the material, or through the thread here. Now, my hands are starting to hurt a little bit, and so I just make sure that, you know, I'm doing a little bit of hand exercises before, during, and after, just to kind of stop the cramping. This is what the back looks like. Sometimes the back has just as beautiful art as the front does. I get a ton of comments on my nails too, and they're from Color Street. I don't remember what the name of this orange one is, but if you see the first video, I think I still had my St. Patrick's Day nails on. Color Street is 100% nail strips, and I will link my stylist in the description in case you're interested in checking it out. Shout out to Gina. Okay, so I got to the end of this side. You know, I could always cover up these hash marks. And I might do that just by going back up and then making some faux lines that are just going to follow. Not really too worried about it. Not sure what it would look like, but I'm not going to be too worried about it. So I'm just going to go back down. You don't really notice I did that. And I'm going to tie this off. Remember the sneaker knot. Okay. There we have that. All right, so we have the back stitch going all the way around. It seemed like I took a little longer of a back stitch there. And I should have kept them all just relatively short, but that's totally fine. I'm not going to cry over stitch length. In fact, I don't think I've ever cried over anything in embroidery, but I'd love to see what you might want to do for embroidery patterns. I like to keep them simple. I'm new to writing patterns, and I write them because I do classes live. And so you kind of got to have a pattern, and we go through the whole process. My classes are about 3 hours long, and it kind of depends on the project. Some take longer than others, but my goal is to always have the students finishing their work before we leave. Okay, so now I'm going to do the satin stitch, and because I don't want to start right here and go there, whenever I'm working on satin stitch, I typically start around here and I go up, and then I fill this in, and then I work my way back down. Just because it would I want the stitch to be perfect and fill it in up here this way versus coming in right there. It just seems a little more rigid when you start right there at the top. So I kind of going to go in right here. I'm going to always use that line right there as my starting point when I'm coming up. And I'm going to follow that stitch length, that stitch direction, I'm sorry. And I'm going to go right down. I use that direction to help me follow like that, 45-degree angle down to like 10. You don't have to worry if you're doing both sides satin stitch. You don't have to worry that you'll lose that middle line. I promise it becomes prominent when you're stitching side by side. I typically work from one side and then I do the other. See how much nicer that kind of looks? I just feel like it kind of looks better when you can cover up. See, I got right up there to the edge and it looks really nice. Now we're going to come back down here and work our way to the left. And eventually I'll start changing that stitch direction a little bit, and that's just about spacing. It's just a matter of trusting yourself. I'll probably start changing this. I'm going to keep going straight like this, and when I get right about here, I'll probably start to change my needle direction just a little bit. Why don't we do that now? So knowing that I'm actually going to be changing a little bit, you can see how we were straight up and down about a 45-degree angle, and I've kind of worked my way down a little bit. probably worked it down just a little too much. So I'm going to take that out. Sometimes it's helpful to lay your string across to kind of see where it lands. Surprisingly, I thought that it was more to the left than it should have been. And so I might come all the way down here. And I see that this is parallel, so I'll go down right here. There's no wrong way to like stitch. Like you can skip around a little bit, but you do have to fill things in. So now I'm going to go back where I started. I'm going to fill that into the right. Now you're going to notice right here I'm going to run into a problem because we have a space coming. No problem at all. I'm going to go one more. Probably was a little too much, but that's okay. So now I'm going to fill this in. And if I just rock my needle underneath to the edge here, you can see how I went to the edge. You won't see where it went, but now I'm going to come back up to the top of the Monstera leaf and go down and cover up. The ink. And I'll go down. And I'll come to a point. It won't seem like I can do it, but I can. And there we go. Perfect. Perfect. So now I could go back in and kind of fill this in if I wanted to. I mean, you would want to if you were doing the project here. Sorry, I had to see. There goes that alarm again. Okay, see how that kind of covered itself up? Perfect. Let's keep going. So you can see how my thread is twisting, right? So now we're going to just, like I showed you, tip it upside down and let it uncurl itself. Notice I'm keeping that very nice dramatic line there in the middle. Here I'm coming up on another edge where I'm going to stop a tiny bit shorter than I did on the other one. And when I go back down here, I'm going to rock the needle just slightly underneath because it kind of hides it. And it gives it an effect that it goes around. And this is something you'll just continue to do until you get to the end. And again, you're just going to make sure that you're working your thread a little bit more this way to give it some dimension. As you can see in here, I started off with a 45-degree angle, and then I slowly made my way a little less. It gives it dimensions so that it looks like the leaf has differences in it. Otherwise, it can look very flat. All right. So I will be doing one more of these videos. We're going to do this pattern, or maybe I'll do another pattern for video number 4. Since I used this one in video number 3, we're going to do one from start to end, but it probably be something a little more simple so that everyone can follow along. I'll put all the links and everything in the description below, as well as a PDF for information that you can print out. And I thank you for stitching with me and checking me out. If you could subscribe, that would be great. There will be more to come. I'm going to be making some patterns and selling them on Etsy, and there'll be there will not I'm sorry, there will not be a physical product at this time. It would just be a download, a PDF download of a pattern, and it'll give you all the instructions and the material list, etc. that you need. And then we'll do a live stitch along once a month. So have a great day. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you soon.